Welcome to my channel Secrets Never Sleep. Please support by subscribing, liking, and sharing. Thank you. Now, let's begin. It was nearly midnight when Grace Miller turned her car into the quiet, tree-lined street of her suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. The rain had just stopped, and the air smelled of wet pine and asphalt, that strange mix that always carried memories. She'd just come from a friend's birthday party, one filled with laughter, soft jazz, and the kind of wine that warms your chest long after the last sip. But even as she smiled through conversations, something inside her had felt hello. Now, sitting in the stillness of her driveway, Grace stared at her porch light glowing like a lonely lantern and wondered why happiness always felt borrowed. Inside, the house was silent. Her 10-year-old son, Ethan, would be asleep by now, or so she thought. Grace slipped off her heels, her feet aching, and tiptoed across the wooden floor. A faint glow spilled from under Ethan's bedroom door. She smiled softly. He probably fell asleep watching cartoons again, she murmured, but when she opened the door, Ethan was wide awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, eyes red, clutching a small photo frame. "Ethan," she whispered, "sweetheart, what are you doing up?" He looked up, his face pale in the lamplight. "Mom," he said in a trembling voice, "why were you smiling with that man tonight?" Grace froze. Her breath caught. The air in the room thickened. "What man?" she asked carefully, walking closer. "The man in the black jacket," Ethan said. "He dropped you off, and he told you something at the door." Grace blinked. Her heart skipped. Ethan wasn't wrong. Daniel, her old college friend, had indeed dropped her home. He'd said, "You still light up a room, Grace." And she had laughed awkwardly, but kindly. But how did Ethan know that? Her pulse quickened. "Were you awake when I came home?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No. I saw it before you came in." Grace frowned, confused. "Before I came in?" Ethan nodded again, gripping the frame tighter. "Dad showed me." Grace felt her stomach twist. Her husband, Mark, had passed away 2 years ago. A sudden heart attack, one of those cruel, ordinary tragedies that leave everything broken but still standing. She sat down slowly beside Ethan. "Honey, what do you mean Dad showed you?" Ethan hesitated. "I had a dream," he whispered. He was standing at the window. "He told me to watch you tonight," he said. "Mom is forgetting." Grace's throat tightened. She didn't believe in signs. Not really, but the way Ethan's voice trembled, the way his small hands clung to that frame, it stirred something deep in her. "Ethan, dreams can feel very real sometimes," she said gently, "but Dad would never want you to worry." "Okay." Tears welled up in his eyes. "But I'm scared, Mom. He said someone's going to take your heart away again, and I won't know what to do." Grace couldn't speak for a moment. The sound of rain starting up again outside filled the silence between them. She reached out, pulling Ethan into her arms. "No one's taking me away," she whispered. "I promise you that." But as she held him, her mind replayed Daniel's words. The way his eyes had lingered just a second too long. And beneath that, deeper still, was a truth she hadn't dared to admit even to herself. She had felt something tonight, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Later that night, after Ethan finally drifted to sleep, Grace walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. The reflection in the window caught her attention, tired eyes, soft smile lines, and a loneliness she never seemed to shake. She remembered Daniel's hand brushing against hers when he passed her a drink. The warmth, the spark, the guilt. But it wasn't just guilt, it was fear. Fear that maybe she was starting to move on, and fear that her late husband's memory was slipping through her fingers like sand. The digital clock on the counter glowed 12:48. Grace turned off the light and stood by the window, staring at the empty street. A single car passed, headlights gliding through the rain. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I hope you got home safe. Tonight felt different. Good night, Grace." She typed a reply, "Thank you, good night." But her thumb hovered over the send button. Something stopped her. She deleted the words, put the phone face down. But just as she turned away, another sound cut through the quiet, a soft creak from the hallway. "Ethan," she called. No answer. She stepped into the corridor. The light from his room flickered faintly, as if someone had just walked past the lamp. "Sweetheart, are you?" She stopped. The picture frame that Ethan had been holding earlier now lay on the floor outside his room. Glass, cracked. And Grace's breath hitched when she saw it. Wasn't the photo of Ethan and his father anymore. It was the picture from her wedding day, but Mark's face was faded, almost ghostly white, as if the ink itself had drained away. Grace's hand trembled as she picked it up. For a moment, she thought she heard something, a whisper, soft and low, carried through the dark hallway. "Don't forget." Her chest tightened. She spun around, no one there, only shadows and silence. Grace stood still for a long minute, the cracked photo in her hand, the echoes of Ethan's dream repeating in her mind. Mom is forgetting, something was happening. Something she couldn't explain, and in that moment, Grace realized this night wasn't just about a party, or an old friend, or even a lonely heart rediscovering warmth, that it was about something far deeper. Something that might change everything she thought she knew about love, memory, and loss. The next morning, the house was wrapped in a still, gray silence, the kind that settles in after a sleepless night. Grace Miller stood at the kitchen counter, staring at her cup of untouched coffee. The rain had stopped, leaving streaks on the window like faint tear marks. Outside, the trees glistened under a pale sunrise. But inside, everything felt heavy. The cracked photo frame sat on the table beside her. She hadn't told Ethan what she'd found in the hallway last night. He'd slept soundly, or at least pretended to. Grace traced her finger over the faded image. Her wedding photo. Mark's face, once so vivid, now looked almost erased by time itself. A chill rippled through her. She whispered to the empty kitchen, "What's happening to us, Mark?" Ethan padded in quietly, his hair tousled, wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas. "Mom," he said softly, "are you mad at me?" Grace looked up quickly. "Mad? No, sweetheart. Why would I be mad?" He glanced at the photo. "Because I dreamed about Dad again." Her heart twisted. She forced a smile. "Dreams aren't bad things, Ethan. Maybe it's just his way of saying hi." Ethan frowned, but it didn't feel like just a dream. She reached out and brushed his hair back. "Sometimes love stays close, even when people are gone. It doesn't mean they're trying to scare us." Ethan nodded, though his small face still carried that quiet worry only children have when something feels wrong but they can't explain it. "Now," she said softly, "go get ready for school. I'll drive you today." He smiled faintly. "Okay, Mom." As he ran upstairs, Grace exhaled, pressing her palms to the counter. Her thoughts drifted again to Daniel, his kind smile, the gentle way he'd said goodbye last night, and then Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. "Someone's going to take your heart away again." She shook the thought off and took her phone. There was another message from Daniel. "Morning, Grace. Didn't sleep much. Thinking about last night. Can we talk sometime?" Her thumb hovered over the screen. She typed, "Maybe after work." And before she could second-guess herself, she hit send. That evening, when Grace picked Ethan up from school, he seemed quieter than usual. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked as they drove home. He stared out the window. "Yeah, just tired." But Grace noticed his fingers tapping restlessly on his knee. She recognized that rhythm. It was the same pattern Mark used to tap when he was deep in thought. Her chest tightened. "Ethan," she said softly, "you know I love you more than anything in this world, right?" He turned to her, eyes serious. "Even more than Dad." The question hit her like a wave she hadn't seen coming. Grace gripped the steering wheel, her throat tightening. "Love doesn't work that way," she whispered. "I loved your dad in one way, and I love you in another. They don't cancel each other out." He looked down. "But Dad said love can fade if you let someone else in." Her blood ran cold. "Ethan," she said quietly, "what did you just say?" He hesitated. "He told me again. Today. During class. I heard his voice. He said you're forgetting him because someone new is trying to take his place." Grace pulled the car to the side of the road, heart pounding. "Ethan, honey," she said, forcing calm, "you can't. You didn't really hear him. Sometimes our minds play tricks when we miss someone." But Ethan's voice broke. "It wasn't a trick, Mom. He was standing outside my classroom window." Grace felt her pulse thudding in her ears. She looked at her son, pale, trembling, and absolutely convinced. And deep down, though she wanted to dismiss it as imagination, a small part of her wasn't sure she could. That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Grace sat in the living room, lights dimmed, and stared at her phone. Daniel had texted again, "Still up. I could come by. Just to talk." She hesitated. Everything inside her felt tangled. Grief, guilt, longing. But she needed to talk to someone. "Okay. But just for a bit," she replied. Within 20 minutes, there was a soft knock at her door. Grace opened it to find Daniel standing there, raincoat still damp, holding 2 cups of coffee. His smile was gentle. "Didn't know if you liked decaf now." She smiled faintly. "Still the same, thanks." They sat on the couch, silence filling the space between them like a fragile thread. Finally, Daniel said, "You've been quiet since last night. Did something happen?" Grace stared at the steam rising from her cup. "It's Ethan," she said softly. "He thinks he's seeing things, hearing his dad." Daniel frowned. "That's heavy," she nodded. "He said Mark's warning him about me. About you, actually." Daniel blinked. "Me." She gave a small, sad laugh. "Apparently, Mark doesn't approve." Daniel leaned forward. "Grace, grief can make kids imagine things. Don't blame yourself for wanting to move on. You've been alone too long." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir in her chest. Something warm, fragile, frightening. Daniel reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "You deserve peace," he whispered, her breath caught. For a moment, she let herself feel it, the closeness, the comfort. But then a sudden crash echoed upstairs. Grace shot to her feet. "Ethan!" She raced up the stairs, heart pounding. Daniel right behind her. Ethan's bedroom door was wide open. The curtains fluttered though the window was closed. On the floor lay Ethan's drawing pad, pages torn. Pencil lines dark and frantic. Grace picked it up and froze. The drawing was of their house, but in the upstairs window, there was a tall figure. A man. And underneath, in a child's shaky handwriting, were the words, "Dad said he's already inside." Grace's breath stopped. She turned slowly toward the hallway mirror, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement behind her reflection. But when she turned, there was nothing there, only silence, and the faint scent of Mark's old cologne drifting through the air. The house was utterly still, yet Grace could feel it breathing. Every wall, every corner, seemed to hum with something unseen. The faint scent of Mark's cologne hung in the air like a whisper from the past. Daniel stood frozen beside her, eyes darting between Grace and the open bedroom door. "Grace," he said slowly, "are you sure no one else lives here?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the drawing in her hands, the shaky handwriting, the dark figure in the window, and those chilling words. "Dad said he's already inside." Her heart hammered as she turned toward Ethan's bed. He was there, curled up, fast asleep, breathing evenly. Grace knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently. "Sweetheart," she whispered. He stirred, but didn't wake. His small hands still gripped a pencil. The lead smudged. Daniel stepped closer. Maybe he drew that before he fell asleep. Grace shook her head. "He doesn't draw like this. He's never drawn anything like this." Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "And look," she pointed to the small signature at the bottom corner of the page. "Ethan and Dad." Daniel's jaw tightened. Maybe it's just his way of keeping Mark close. Grace stood, clutching the drawing to her chest. Or maybe Mark's closer than we think. Downstairs, the two sat in the living room again, both quiet for a long time. The rain had started up outside, tapping gently against the windows. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't actually believe Mark's spirit is here, do you?" Grace hesitated. "I don't know what to believe anymore." She looked toward the staircase. "Last night, I heard a voice. Just a whisper. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but..." Daniel placed his hand over hers, warm and steady. "Grace, you've been through a lot. Grief can make things feel real that aren't. You're exhausted. Anyone would be..." She nodded weakly but couldn't shake the feeling crawling under her skin. "You didn't smell that cologne upstairs, did you?" Daniel's eyes softened. "No," he said quietly, "but I believe you." That simple sentence made her throat tighten. Nobody had said that to her in a long time. Grace leaned back, exhaling. "Sometimes I wonder if I've kept myself too closed off. Maybe Mark's memory feels alive because I never let myself move on." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking." His words lingered. Grace met his gaze, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't passion. It wasn't even romance. It was connection, a fragile understanding that they were both lonely souls trying to heal. But before she could say a word, a small voice came from the stairs. "Mom." Ethan stood there, eyes wide and glassy, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Grace rose quickly. "Ethan, what are you doing up? It's late." He looked past her, straight at Daniel. "Mom," he whispered. "Dad doesn't like him here." The room went still. Grace's hands trembled. "Honey, what are you talking about?" Ethan's lower lip quivered. "He told me again. He said this man is going to break everything." Grace's chest tightened. She glanced at Daniel, who stood frozen, uncertain whether to say anything. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "nobody's breaking anything. Mr. Daniel is just a friend." Ethan shook his head. "No. Dad said he remembers him. Daniel blinked. What? Grace turned sharply. Daniel, what's he talking about? Daniel's expression changed, just slightly, a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. I don't know. Ethan took a small step back, eyes fixed on Daniel. Dad said he saw you with Mom once before. Before he died. Grace's breath caught. Ethan, that's not. She stopped. Her pulse quickened. She turned toward Daniel. Daniel, is that true? He hesitated. Grace, listen, it's not what you think. Just tell me, she demanded softly, her voice breaking. Did you see me before Mark passed away? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. It was months before, Grace. We bumped into each other at a cafe. You were upset that day. You said things weren't easy at home. I listened, that's all. I swear, that's all. Grace stared at him, feeling the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. Why didn't you ever tell me that? Because it didn't matter, he said. You'd lost him, and I didn't want to add to your pain. Ethan's voice trembled. Dad said it matters now. Grace turned to her son, but before she could say anything, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they went out completely. The house plunged into darkness. Grace gasped. Ethan, stay still. Daniel pulled out his phone, switching on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the dark, revealing the family photos on the wall. Grace froze. Every single picture, her wedding, family trips, Christmas mornings had changed in each photo. Mark's face was blurred, faded, like it was being erased. One by one, Ethan began to cry softly. Mom, he's mad. Grace grabbed him, holding him close. No one's mad, baby. It's just the power. But before she could finish, the soft sound of humming drifted through the room. It was low, familiar, and heartbreakingly gentle. Mark's voice. Grace's eyes filled with tears. No, it can't be. Daniel's flashlight trembled in his hand. Grace, the humming grew louder, and from upstairs came the faint creak of footsteps. Slow, heavy, familiar. Grace's grip tightened around Ethan. Then, from the darkness above, came a whisper, tender, sorrowful, almost loving. Grace, why are you trying to replace me? Grace's heart shattered into silence. Ethan sobbed quietly. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the staircase. The voice came again, this time closer. I kept my promise, Grace. I said I'd always be here. The sound of that voice, familiar, warm, and yet impossibly distant, rooted Grace to the spot. Her heart raced, her skin prickled, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Mark, she whispered, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the rain outside filled the void, tapping gently against the windows as if urging her to breathe again. Daniel's hand found her shoulder. Grace, we need to get out of this house. Now. But she couldn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the staircase, the place where Mark used to stand every morning, coffee in hand, smiling at her. The thought of that memory turning into something haunting made her chest ache. Then, the light flickered back on. Everything looked normal. The photos on the wall were just as they'd always been. Mark's face was clear again. No fading, no distortion. Ethan clung to her arm. Mom, please don't go upstairs. She knelt and cupped his face. Honey, it's okay. It's over now. Maybe the lights just. But before she could finish, the picture frame from the hallway, the one that had cracked the night before, slid off the console table by itself and shattered on the floor. Grace jumped, her heart lurching. Daniel stepped in front of her. That's it, he said firmly. We're leaving. Right now. But Ethan pulled at her hand, whispering. No, Dad doesn't want us to leave. He said he needs you to listen. Grace looked down at her son's tear-streaked face and felt her strength crumble. Listen to what? She whispered. Ethan hesitated, his small voice shaking. He said, he never wanted to leave you, but you're letting someone else change what he promised to keep safe. Her throat tightened. What does that mean? Ethan's eyes darted toward Daniel. He said that man took something from him. Daniel stepped back. Grace, I don't know what he's talking about. You know I'd never. But Grace's mind was spinning. Memories flooded back. A quiet afternoon, years ago. A fight with Mark she never told anyone about. The loneliness that had followed. The cafe where Daniel had found her crying. Could Mark have known? Her heart ached at the thought. No, she said quietly, shaking her head. No, I didn't do anything wrong. Daniel reached for her hand again, his voice soft. Grace, please. You're exhausted. Let's just go somewhere safe. I'll drive you both to my place. You can rest. Think. But Ethan's voice cut in, trembling but firm. Mom, don't go with him. Grace looked between the two, her son's frightened face and Daniel's pleading eyes. Ethan, He's trying to help, she said gently. No, Ethan cried. Dad said, if you leave with him, you'll never come back. The words hit Grace like a storm. Her chest tightened, and suddenly the air in the room felt too heavy to breathe. Grace, Daniel said, voice low, steady, almost desperate. Listen to me. You're grieving, you're tired. Whatever this is, it's not real. But even as he spoke, a gust of cold wind rushed through the room, and the front door slammed shut on its own. The coffee cups rattled. The air smelled again of Mark's cologne, stronger this time, overwhelming. Daniel turned toward the door. What the and then? From somewhere near the stairs, came a faint sound, a whisper carried by the wind. You promised me forever. Grace's knees weakened. Mark. She whispered again. The air seemed to pulse. The lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied. Ethan cried out and pointed toward the staircase. Mom, look. At the top of the stairs hung the wedding photo, only now. It was tilted, hanging crooked and across the glass. Written in foggy condensation as if by an unseen hand, were the words, "Don't forget what you said that night." Grace's lips parted in shock. What I said, she whispered. That night, the night before Mark died, it had been one of their worst arguments. He'd wanted her to stay home, to spend more time as a family. But she'd felt trapped, like her life had become too small, too quiet. She'd said words she wished she never had. Maybe I need to find myself again, even if that means without you. And the next morning, he was gone. The memory hit her like a wave, cold and sharp. Daniel watched her face pale. Grace, what happened that night? Tears filled her eyes. We fought, and I said something I can never take back. Ethan whispered. That's why he's sad, Mom. He thinks you stopped loving him. Grace sank to the floor, hands shaking. I didn't stop. I just forgot how to show it. Daniel knelt beside her. Grace, you can't blame yourself for what happened. You didn't cause this. But deep down, Grace wasn't sure she believed that anymore. The room grew quiet again, heavy with emotion, and then the lamp beside the couch flickered once more. The light steadied, and in that warm glow, Grace noticed something on the table that hadn't been there before. It was a letter, folded neatly. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mark's. She opened it slowly. Grace, if you ever find this, it means you're ready. Ready to forgive yourself. Ready to live again? I never wanted to haunt you. I just wanted you to remember that love doesn't end when life does. But promise me one thing. Don't let fear steal your second chance. A tear slid down her cheek. She read the last line twice. Her heart aching. Daniel touched her shoulder gently. Grace. She looked up at him, and for the first time her eyes were steady, clear. He's not angry, she said softly. He's trying to let me go. Ethan stepped closer, wiping his eyes. Then, can he go now? Grace pulled him into her arms. Maybe now he can. The room felt lighter, the air warmer, calmer. The hum of something unseen faded into silence. But as Daniel stood, relief spreading across his face, Grace noticed something he hadn't, in the reflection of the window behind him. Just for a second, a familiar figure stood smiling. Mark. He looked at her with the same warmth he always had, and then slowly faded away. Grace smiled through her tears, whispering, "Goodbye, Mark." But as the night settled again, she couldn't shake one final, lingering thought. Mark's letter had said, "Don't let fear steal your second chance." And deep in her heart, she wondered what if that second chance had already begun. With Daniel, morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, warm and golden, touching the corners of Grace's home like a gentle hand. For the first time in months, maybe years, the air didn't feel heavy. No whispers, no flickering lights, no haunting presence, just peace. Grace stood by the window, holding her coffee, staring at the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm was over. Ethan's laughter echoed from the kitchen as he fed crumbs to their golden retriever. Max. His laughter, that simple, pure sound, filled the house with life again. Grace smiled. You're in a good mood today, she said. Ethan grinned, milk mustache and all. I dreamed about Dad again, but he wasn't sad this time. He was smiling. Her heart melted. Yeah, he said he's going somewhere bright, and he told me to take care of you now. Grace's eyes glistened. She walked over and hugged him tight. He was right. You're my little man. Ethan hugged her back and whispered. He also said it's okay to be happy again. Grace froze for a moment, then nodded softly. Then maybe it's time we try. Later that day, she stood outside, watering the garden that Mark once tended with such care. She could still remember his hands, steady, patient, planting those rose bushes their first spring in the house. Now, as the breeze brushed against her face, she swore she could almost feel him there beside her, calm and content. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. Still growing those roses, huh? Grace turned, smiling when she saw Daniel standing at the gate, holding a small box of pastries. "You're early," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Thought I'd bring breakfast. Peace offering. For a very strange night." Grace chuckled softly. "Strange is one word for it." He smiled, stepping closer. "You okay?" She looked down at the flowers, then back at him. "I think I am. For the first time in a long time." They stood there for a moment, quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that said, "We've both been through something we'll never quite explain. And somehow, we're still standing." Daniel's voice was gentle. "I was thinking about what you said last night about second chances." Grace tilted her head, curious. "What about it?" He looked her in the eyes. "Maybe that's what this is. Not about forgetting Mark, but about letting yourself feel something new. Something honest." Her heart fluttered. It wasn't a rush of romance, not a dramatic spark, but something softer, deeper. Like the first sunlight after a long winter, Grace smiled. "Maybe you're right." Daniel handed her one of the pastries, grinning. "It's from that cafe where we first met." She laughed. "The one where I cried into my coffee." He nodded playfully. "Hey, I still remember you ordered 3 muffins. I figured this time, we could share one instead." Grace laughed again, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in so long. Ethan poked his head out the door. "Mom, is Mr. Daniel staying for breakfast?" Grace looked at Daniel, who smiled warmly at Ethan. "If that's okay with you." "Buddy," Daniel said. Ethan's face brightened. "Yeah. Dad said I should be nice to you now." Grace blinked, surprised. "He said that?" Ethan nodded. "Last night in my dream, he said, 'Tell your mom she deserves to smile again.'" Grace's breath caught. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she smiled softly. "Then I guess breakfast it is." They sat together at the table, Grace, Ethan, and Daniel, sunlight streaming in, the smell of warm pastries filling the air. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real as they talked and laughed. Grace glanced toward the living room where Mark's photo hung once again in its frame, perfectly whole. The morning light caught the glass, and for a second, it almost looked as if he was smiling back at her, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath. That evening, after Daniel left, Grace tucked Ethan into bed. He yawned sleepily, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Mom," he murmured. Double quotes. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Dad can see us now?" Grace smiled, brushing his hair back. "I think he always could." He nodded. "Then maybe he knows you're not sad anymore." She kissed his forehead. "Maybe he does." Ethan smiled and drifted off to sleep. Peaceful and safe. Grace stood there for a moment, watching him breathe, feeling the quiet warmth of the home around her. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt loved by the past, by the present, and maybe, just maybe, by what was still to come. Later that night, as the moonlight poured softly through her window, Grace whispered to the still air, "I'll never forget you, Mark. But I'm ready to live again." Outside, a soft breeze stirred the roses, as if in answer. And somewhere, deep within her heart, she finally knew. Love never really leaves. It just changes shape. 6 months later, the house on Maplewood Lane looked different. Not because of a new coat of paint or new furniture, but because it finally felt alive again. The laughter that once vanished had returned. The windows stayed open now, letting the soft Oregon breeze carry the scent of roses through every room. Grace Miller stood in the backyard, hands in the soil, sunlight warming her face. She had started a new tradition every month. She planted a rose bush in Mark's memory. Each one bloomed brighter than the last. Ethan ran across the yard, his sneakers leaving small prints in the dirt. "Mom, look," he shouted, holding up a science project, a homemade weather station built from recycled cans. Grace smiled proudly. "Wow, you made that all by yourself." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining. "Mr. Daniel helped me. He said if you can measure the weather, you can predict the sunshine." She laughed softly. That sounds like something he'd say. Daniel had become part of their lives slowly, not as a replacement, but as a quiet, steady presence. He never tried to fill Mark's shoes. He simply walked beside them, step by step, until his presence felt natural. On weekends, he helped Grace and Ethan in the garden, trimming roses, fixing old things around the house, and bringing laughter back to the dinner table. Grace didn't rush anything. Love wasn't something she chased anymore, it was something that grew. Quietly, like the flowers outside her window. That evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Daniel joined her in the garden. He carried a small wooden plaque with neat, engraved words. For Mark, who taught us that love never ends, it only changes form. Grace's throat tightened as she read it. It's beautiful, she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. It felt right. She reached out, touching his hand softly. He'd like that you're here. Daniel looked at her, eyes warm. I think he'd want you to be happy. Grace smiled, eyes glistening. I finally am. They stood there for a moment, hand in hand, as the last rays of sunlight brushed the garden. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of roses and something else familiar, comforting, almost like cologne. Grace looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mark." And for a fleeting second, she could swear she saw a figure in the sunlight standing by the roses, smiling. Then it was gone. But she didn't feel sad. Not anymore. She simply closed her eyes and let the peace wash over her. That night, Grace sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars come alive one by one. Ethan was asleep. Max snored softly by the door, and Daniel was inside, cleaning up dinner dishes. While humming an old tune, Grace smiled to herself. She had finally learned what Mark had tried to tell her. Love doesn't live in pictures, or rooms, or shadows of what used to be. It lives in the moments we choose to keep going. It lives in forgiveness. And it lives in the courage to love again. As the cool night air drifted through the garden, Grace whispered one last time, not to the past, but to the future, here's 2 second chances. And to love that never sleeps. The wind carried her words into the starlit sky, and somewhere, beyond what eyes could see, a promise was kept.